If you're watching this, you are already familiar with the Mandela Effect. But what you don't know is why the Mandela Effect is happening. You don't know the cause. You don't know the mechanism behind it. You might have a theory. You might have many theories. But the truth seems out of reach. There are plenty of scapegoats if you need them. CERN, or the Large Hadron Collider, is a popular one. Robert Kiviott's movie that released earlier this year seemed to exclusively want to blame them. When I asked him why in a Reddit AMA, he said they were the most likely suspect. But other than a few odd photos and performances that seem to dabble in the occult, there's no reason to think it's CERN, other than the fact that a lot of people seem to blame them. Quantum computing is another one, which at least has a bit more compelling evidence. One of the founders of D-Wave spoke of using quantum computing to access parallel worlds.
So the way I think about it is that the shadows of these parallel worlds overlap with ours. And if we're smart enough, we can dive into them and grab their resources and pull them back into ours to make an effect in our world.
He even mentioned the Mandela Effect in a Q&A.
One of the interesting things that's happened from the D-Wave story is there's this gigantic conspiracy that's arisen on the internet that goes like this. So D-Wave builds quantum computers. The way that they work, if you know how this works, is one of the interpretations is that you tap into these parallel universes and they do computations. Sounds really weird. But what's happened is this idea has been hijacked to describe something called the Mandela Effect, which is this thing where the past changes. So think about something you know to be true from the past. And then imagine you went out on the internet and you can't find it at all. It's not there. It doesn't match with your experience. So these people think that D-Wave is responsible, and CERN.
There's even corporate PowerPoints that seem to point to quantum computing as the answer. Here's one from Next Inc. Quantum physics, the Mandela Effect, and perceived changes to your entree data. Over the last 3 to 4 years, Next clients have reported that the data that shows up on reports does not appear to be accurate. Next technical support spends a large amount of time and resources helping clients determine if there is a problem or if it is a software bug. When the data is manually audited, including going back to hard copy invoices, the data on the reports is proven to be accurate and correct. This issue causes hours and days of wasted time for both Next technical support and our clients. What is happening? Their conclusion is that parts of other parallel universes have been merging or replacing into ours. This is a software vendor trying to come up with an explanation for this Mandela Effect, and their conclusion was quantum computing. It's compelling stuff, and if you need an explanation that factors in modern scientific advancements, well, that's available. There are a lot of other possible culprits, ranging from time travelers to simulations to God or devils and demons. When I conducted a survey earlier this year, the number one cause was voted to be reality or timeline shifting, meaning those that are affected believe their consciousness may have shifted from one timeline to another. What's been lacking is an authoritative source. Since modern science is predisposed to dismiss the Mandela Effect as confabulation rather than study it, we can't depend on it for answers. That means even theories that involve CERN or quantum computers are merely speculation and guesswork. But there are other sources of information out there, though they may be beyond what's typically considered conventional. If the Mandela Effect has opened your mind, you may find what they have to say enlightening. Channeling is the practice of communicating with or receiving information from a spiritual entity, higher consciousness, or other non-physical being, often through a medium who acts as a conduit. It can involve spoken messages, written texts, or other forms of expression believed to come from an external spiritual source. Outside some scenes in the movie Ghost and a few episodes of the show Medium, I wasn't too familiar with the concept. And before the Mandela Effect hit me, I probably wouldn't have given it much credence. But once I started looking for answers, channeled materials started coming up, not only to provide explanations for the Mandela Effect, but for reality and life itself. I'd never heard of most of them, but I was intrigued. And though there wasn't a lot that dealt directly with the Mandela Effect among them, there was enough that I believe it's worth sharing. So today, we're going to look at what's been said about the Mandela Effect or related concepts by those who've channeled higher dimensional beings and even God. Yes, that's right, God. These will only be excerpts, so I'm hoping they make sense out of context. But you can always read the full work if you want to learn more, and I recommend it. Alright, with that, let's get started. We'll begin with one of the earliest channeled works, the Seth Material. Starting in 1963, author and medium Jane Roberts channeled an entity named Seth, who purported to be from an adjacent plane of existence. Transcripts of these channeling sessions were released as books, and the collective Seth Material is considered one of the pillars of New Age philosophy. Seth Speaks is regarded as the paramount book in the collection, and it's the only one we'll be looking at today. It was first published in 1972, so you won't find any direct mentions of the Mandela Effect within its pages. But the concepts that seem to comprise the Mandela Effect pop up more than once. The first paragraph that caught my eye had to deal with the impermanence of physical matter. Our environment, therefore, is composed of exquisite imbalances, where change is allowed full play. Your own time structure misleads you into your ideas of the relative permanency of physical matter, and you close your eyes to the constant alterations within it. Your physical senses confine you as best they can to the perception of a highly formalized reality. Only through the use of the intuitions and in sleep and dream states, as a rule, can you perceive the joyfully changing nature of your own and any consciousness. Constant alterations of physical matter? That sounds like an aspect of the Mandela Effect. Confined by both time and our physical senses to a highly formalized reality? Well, that was certainly true, at least before becoming Mandela affected. Seth continues in this train of direction. You stress those ideas and thoughts and attitudes that you recall from past experience as your own, completely ignoring those that once were characteristic and now are vanished, ignoring the fact also that you cannot hold thought. The thought of a moment before, in your terms, vanishes away. You try to maintain a constant, relatively permanent physical and subjective self in order to maintain a relatively constant, relatively permanent environment. So you are always in a position of ignoring such change. Those that you refuse to acknowledge are precisely those that will give you a much better understanding of the true nature of reality, individual subjectivity, and the physical environment that seems to surround you. If I'm understanding this correctly, our past is not constant, nor is our environment permanent. And because some of us are able to see that now, we have a better understanding of the true nature of reality. But what is that nature? But before we are finished, we will see that basically speaking, each of you create the book you hold in your hands, and that your entire physical environment comes as naturally out of your inner mind as words come out of your mouths, and that man forms physical objects as unself-consciously and as automatically as he forms his own breath. The particular aspects of your physical world are dependent upon your existence and focus within it. This seems to reflect the idea that observation creates reality. Now, within the physical reality that you know, there are hints and clues as to the nature of other physical realities. There are latent within your own physical forms other senses, unused, that could have come to the front but in your probability did not. From any given point of your existence, however, you can glimpse other probable realities and sense the reverberations of probable actions beneath those physical decisions that you make. So, what is it that the Mandela Effected are doing? Recalling pasts that have vanished? Glimpsing other probable realities? Experiencing the changing nature of reality? While the concepts are intriguing, there aren't exactly answers to be found here, only possibilities. Seth Speaks only lightly delves into these matters, but it's probably worth a read. And there could be more in the other books in the Seth Material. I just haven't gotten around to reading them. But a lot of what's brought up here is mentioned in the other channeled materials, and sometimes it's further expanded on. The Law of One, also known as the Raw Material, was channeled from 1981 to 1984 by Carla Ruckert with partners Don Elkins and Jim McCarthy. Ra was not a single extra-dimensional entity, but a sixth-density social memory complex. Basically, this means it's higher dimensional and composed of a multitude of entities working in tandem. Now, we won't be looking at the text of the Law of One today. You see, those involved with the Ra contact founded Love Light Research and have continued channeling an entity called Quo to this day. Quo is composed of 3 social memory complexes, including Ra, and it's from these sessions that I found something that could be related to the Mandela Effect. Unfortunately, there's no direct question about it, but we do have questions related to timelines. Here's one of them. I have a query, Quo. I don't know that you can answer it, but I feel a pulling apart of timelines, I guess. A sorting of vibratory frequencies into different octaves. Can you comment on that? The perception of the timelines, as you describe them, is a perception of potential realities that you have participated in within both the dream state and the meditative state, where you have allowed an opening to potential realities that your higher self has utilized in offering to you, and to others like you, the opportunity to experience a greater variety of challenges, shall we say. These challenges are lessons presented in symbolic form as each entity in any incarnation presents to itself within the incarnation to be experienced at that point. However, the choices for such lessons are made before the incarnation, so that before your current incarnation, you have chosen certain realities in which to express these challenges, these symbolic puzzles that can, when untangled, reveal to you a greater perspective in your own spiritual journey. The feeling of the dissolving of such timelines is a residue of the learning of that which was set before you, so that there's no longer a need for it to exist within any portion of your being, other than that being which you now are here. Thus you are, shall we say, closing up shop so that there may be a graduation into the 4th density of love and understanding at the end of this incarnation. What Quo seems to be getting at is that what we may be experiencing as the Mandela Effect is actually an intentional challenge and a symbolic puzzle meant to spur our spiritual growth. Of course, I may be reading between the lines, but let's just say there's a reason the logo of the Mandela Effect database is a puzzle piece. Now, that line about residue certainly caught my eye, as it's a term we hear a lot in the Mandela Effect community. The feeling that timelines are dissolving is related to that which we learned but no longer need. And this is happening because we are preparing for our own spiritual graduation. Does that sound about right? Some of this stuff is rather, well, complex, and I'm not going to get in depth on what densities are here. Let's just say it relates to the level of consciousness of a particular being. There are plenty of other videos and articles that cover it more. You might even want to give Law of One a read. Before we move on, there was one more question and answer that covered timelines. I have a question on timelines. It appears that they're closer and closer together, and timeline jumping is more and more prevalent than it used to be. Is this correct? As far as we are aware, that experiencing various timelines is something that has been occurring for a great portion of what you would call time. This allows the seeker of truth to begin to expand its knowledge of its journey and the way of achieving the graduation into the fourth density of love and understanding. Thus, if various timelines can be used by one entity, then there is the accumulation of more experience, so that the progress of the oversoul, shall we say, or the higher self that is expressing itself in the third density illusion is enhanced and can be considered to be more productive of achieving the pre-incarnated choices of learning certain lessons that, again, are the food for growth, the grist for the mill, shall we say. Again, it sounds like our experiencing various timelines is part of our spiritual growth. And I'd say that such an experience is certainly an aspect of the Mandela Effect. This awareness of Earths with different geographies, companies with different logos, histories that we didn't grow up with are all part of our journey. So far, we've only looked at some indirect answers related to the Mandela Effect, but there are some channeled sources that have addressed it directly. If you've been around YouTube, you may have encountered a video featuring Daryl Anka. Anka, who is the cousin of 60s teen idol Paul Anka, claims to channel an extraterrestrial entity named Bashar. He's been doing this for a while, and he's covered a range of subjects, including the Mandela Effect. This first video comes from Daryl Anka's appearance on the Next Level Soul podcast.
From Bashar's point of view, what is happening with the Mandela Effect? What's this phenomenon?
Yeah, aside from the instances where you might actually have a failure of memory.
That happens.
That happens too. Not everything is the Mandela Effect. But yes, I believe the Mandela Effect from Bashar's perspective is that when you change your present, you actually do change your past. And that means that even on a collective level, when the collective changes its present in a certain way, you actually change the past of the collective as well, including what you remember as your past. Because if the past is also changeable, in order to explain the change that was made in the present, in order to justify the change that exists in the present, you have to remember a different past that makes it make sense that that past led to this present. So past is changing all the time. And the history that we're looking at, that we say, oh yes, it's always been that way, may not have been that way 5 minutes ago. But it comes with the idea that it's always been that way to make sense out of where we are now. But because our consciousness is expanding, because we can start to contain the idea that there are multiple realities at the same time, sometimes different people will retain sort of a bleed through of the other reality while still also being in a reality that contains people that remember the different reality, the different history. And so people can suddenly honestly disagree about what the past really was, because both pasts are true. They're both real, but we're describing something now in a parallel reality that is no longer our history, but perhaps used to be. But some people will retain some of that and compare it to what's going on in the new history, because again, our consciousness is expanding enough to be able to contain more than one idea of what reality is. And that's one of the side effects of that expansion. It's sort of similar. Another expression of it is what we also call deja vu. Deja vu, the idea that this feels familiar, but it also feels like not only have I done it before, I can sense what's about to happen because I've done it before. So the idea is you may be slipping into either a parallel reality where another version of you has already done that, and you're connecting to that other version so that when you catch up, when your reality catches up to that reality, because they might not be in sync time-wise, that reality might be a month ahead of yours, a year ahead of yours. But when you catch up to that, when your reality experiences that particular situation, and you're connecting to that parallel reality because you've expanded your consciousness, you might go, why does this feel so familiar? And why does it feel like I know what's about to happen next? Because it feels like I did this already. So you might be slipping into a parallel reality branch of information where another version of you has already done this. And that's why it feels familiar. So
it's like
these kinds of slippages are becoming more common, I think, because our consciousness is expanding to be able to handle information from more than one parallel reality.
So here we have the first instance of when a question about the Mandela Effect was directly posed. And from what I can gather from it, we are experiencing parallel realities and retaining memories from one reality even when our consciousness has moved on from that reality to another. Changes in our present can affect our past, both individually and collectively, and he actually goes a little more into this when discussing timelines. Yep, it's about timelines again.
Said, you all assume you have a single timeline that goes from your past to your future. In fact, what you're doing is this. You are scanning all of the frames of reference of all the parallel realities that are relevant for the theme that you chose to explore in this life. And you are drawing down and plugging in and unplugging from and connecting to and disconnecting from all the frames and parallel realities that are relevant for this theme. You are constructing, literally, moment to moment, billions of times per second, constructing what appears to be a single timeline made up of frames, one after the other in a certain order, from thousands of parallel reality connections. You are doing this all the time automatically. When you have an inspiration, oh, I just thought of this. It may be coming from a parallel reality person that you're plugging into that is having that experience. And therefore you can get the inspiration because their experience in that particular reality is relevant for the theme you chose to explore in this reality, in this timeline. You're constantly merging with timelines to build the timeline that is relevant to your theme, as they are doing with you, drawing upon your experiences, your information to construct their timelines. All of this going on at the same time. That's how powerful you are.
Our lives are actually constructed from billions of timelines. Each new experience is us pulling frames from one timeline into our current lifetime. And our lifetimes are made up of frames from all of these parallel realities. And some of us are recognizing the inconsistencies this causes as we expand our consciousness. The next channeler we're going to look at uses similar language to describe the Mandela Effect. ReiRei is a Reddit user that claims to channel an extraterrestrial entity from the Arcturus star system. I stumbled on his post during one of my many searches for answers, and while there may be more reason to be skeptical here, these answers gel with a lot of what I've already brought up. As the frequency of your world ascends, human consciousness is becoming increasingly more aware of the laws of creation that have always been there, but your collective didn't have the awareness to perceive them until recently. One of those laws is the term you've coined as the Mandela Effect, which from our perspective is simply the fact that you are constantly shifting to timelines that correlate to your emotional state. When you shift to a new timeline, you do not only alter your future, but also your past either becomes tweaked or reformed completely, depending upon the degree of a shift you've made in your consciousness. All is reflecting you. Many scientists on your world believe that people make their memories up, but a lot of the time, they still have the memories of a timeline they're no longer on between their ears. This is how many of you are noticing subtle changes in your realities. A lot of your false memories belong to another timeline. You are all manifesting, it's just that most of you do not recognize your own harvest whenever it appears. Most are manifesting and living in an unconscious state. Learning how to consciously keep your frequency ascended so you streamline your consciousness on higher vibratory timelines is what many of you are in the process of mastering. And one way you can also do this is to connect with beings who exist on a higher rung than you on the vibrational ladder. Ultimately, humanity is becoming aware of the nature of parallel realities through your observations of the Mandela Effect, and the more you realize how malleable reality is, you'll be more capable of making the changes you truly prefer in your experience of physical reality, both individually and collectively. This sounds pretty close to what Bashar was describing, doesn't it? You also might have caught that he calls it the Mandela Effect at one point. I don't know if that's intentional or a typo, but it has made me wonder what other names the Mandela Effect may go by in other timelines. I remember seeing one comment on Reddit that someone insisted they knew it as the Obama Effect. I wonder what might have happened in that timeline to give it that name. There's one more post from ReiRei regarding the Mandela Effect. Many in your world seem to believe that only two timelines exist. This is mostly due to the awareness of the phenomenon otherwise known as the Mandela Effect seeping into your collective. However, timelines are countless, and your consciousness constantly oscillates through them and aligns with those realities that correlate to your state of being. For example, at this moment, you have many choices you could make. Each of those choices is a new timeline. And then you consider the state of consciousness through which you make such choices. Let's say you decide to go to the park to walk your dog. Are you going stressed, anxious, or full of joy and appreciation for life? Every emotion is a different timeline because emotional states determine how you perceive the world. But which world exactly? A lot of you are also assuming that you can change the world. Even though the experience you have makes it seem as such, you actually never do. You change the version of the Earth you experience when you, as a collective or an individual, do something for the greater good. The chaos of the universal flux is slippery and unpredictable. But beneath all that chaos is cosmic intelligence, the divine mind that connects all realities through the invisible web of synchronicity. If you stood before a mirror, waiting for your reflection to smile first, you'd be waiting forever. Physical reality is a mirror of your inner self. Thus, to shift to preferred timelines, you must be willing to smile within yourself first. Those who wish for their outer reality to change before they change their state become slaves to society and remain anchored to lower vibrational timelines where a victim mentality holds dominion. Timeline traversing is the skill set of slipstreaming through the cosmic currents, consciously and intentionally. So, traversing timelines isn't only dependent on our choices, but our emotional state as well. You might have also noticed the mention of a cosmic intelligence, which relates to where we're going next. When it comes to authoritative sources, you're not going to find one more authoritative than God. And if Neil Donald Walsh is to be believed, God started providing answers to his questions at a particularly low point in his life in the early 90s, through something akin to automatic writing. His dialogue with God became the Conversations with God series of books. And when the Mandela Effect came for me, I eventually turned to these books looking for answers. Before we dive into some of God's answers that may relate to the Mandela Effect, there's 2 passages I want to bring up. Here's the first. You should now better understand how people of like mind can work together to create a favored reality. The phrase, "wherever 2 or more are gathered in my name," becomes much more meaningful. For those familiar with biblical Mandela effects, you might have recognized that God just quoted a Bible passage that no longer exists. In nearly every version of the Bible, Matthew 18:20 is now, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them." Normally, this might just be considered residue, but this is God speaking. I found it to be significant. Then there's this passage. "I tell you this, until you are willing to take responsibility for all of it, you cannot change any of it. You cannot keep saying they did it and they are doing it, and if only they would get it right." Remember the wonderful line from Walt Kelly's comic strip character, Pogo, and never forget it. "We have met the enemy, and they is us." This stood out to me when I first read it, so I was compelled to look it up. There was a reason God told us to never forget it, and it's because that is no longer the line from the comic strip. It's now, "We have met the enemy and he is us." Again, this seemed like more than residue. This is God specifically telling us not to forget this line, because he knew it was going to change. And it has changed, though you can find residue of the quote elsewhere, like in Walt Kelly's obituary from the New York Times. Now that I've shared with you why I found these conversations compelling, it's time to go into some of God's words that deal with aspects of the Mandela Effect. Now, this was the early 90s, so the Mandela Effect isn't mentioned directly, but you'll find a lot of what is stated strongly correlates with some of the other channeled material we've already gone over. There is no time but this time. There is no moment but this moment. Now is all there is. What about yesterday and tomorrow? Figments of your imagination, constructions of your mind, non-existent in ultimate reality. Everything that ever happened, is happening, and ever will happen is happening right now. I don't understand. And you can't, not completely, but you can begin to. And a beginning grasp is all that is needed here. So just listen. Time is not a continuum. It is an element of relativity that exists vertically, not horizontally. Don't think of it as a left to right thing, a so-called timeline that runs from birth to death for each individual, and from some finite point to some finite point for the universe. Time is an up and down thing. Think of it as a spindle, representing the eternal moment of now. Now picture leaves of paper on the spindle, one atop the other. These are the elements of time, each element separate and distinct, yet each existing simultaneously with the other. All the paper on the spindle at once, as much as there will ever be, as much as there ever was. There is only one moment, this moment, the eternal moment of now. It is right now that everything is happening, and I am glorified. There is no waiting for the glory of God. I made it this way because I just couldn't wait. I was so happy to be who I am that I just couldn't wait to make that manifest in my reality. So boom, here it is, right here, right now, all of it. There is no beginning to this, and there is no end. Again, we're looking at a description of time that doesn't conform to how we're used to thinking about it. Let's keep going. You mean we can time travel? Indeed, and many of you have. All of you have, in fact, and you do it routinely, usually in what you call your dream state. Most of you are not aware of it. You cannot retain the awareness. But the energy sticks to you like glue, and sometimes there's enough residue that others, sensitive to this energy, can pick up things about your past or your future. They feel or breathe this residue, and you call them seers and psychics. Sometimes there's enough residue that even you, in your limited consciousness, are aware that you've been here before. Your whole being is suddenly jarred by the realization that you've done this all before. Deja vu. So of course, seeing residue mentioned, I was inclined to include this, but we also heard Daryl Anka mention that the Mandela Effect and deja vu may be more closely related than we think. And if we look back at the survey I conducted earlier this year, we'll see that a large percentage of the Mandela affected experience deja vu. But now I have another question. What about past lives? If I've always been me in the past and in the future, how could I have been someone else, another person, in a past life? You are a divine being, capable of more than one experience at the same time, and able to divide yourself into as many different selves as you choose. You can live the same life over and over again in different ways, as I've just explained, and you can also live different lives at different times on the continuum. Thus, all the while you're being you, here now, you can also be, and have been, other selves in other times and places. In your linear reality, you see the experience as one of past, present, and future. You imagine yourself to have one life, or perhaps many, but surely only one at a time. But what if there were no time? Then you'd be having all your lives at once. You are. You are living this life, your presently realized life, in your past, your present, your future, all at once. Have you ever had a strange foreboding about some future event, so powerful that made you turn away from it? In your language, you call that premonition. From my viewpoint, it is simply an awareness you suddenly have of something you've just experienced in your future. Your future you is saying, hey, this was no fun. Don't do this. You are also living other lives, what you call past lives, right now as well, although you experience them as having been in your past, if you experience them at all, and that is just as well. It would be very difficult for you to play this wonderful game of life if you had full awareness of what is going on. So, according to God, we are living all of our lives all at once, and we have the ability to tap into those lives. Sometimes this can occur as deja vu, and sometimes this can occur as a foreboding feeling. But is it also possible that we're tapping into the memories of these other lives? And just how many other lives would that be? Okay, but now here's where it gets crazy. If one of the me's on the space-time continuum dies, then comes back here as another person, then who am I? I would have to be existing as two people at once. And if I kept on doing this through all eternity, which you say I do, then I am being 100 people at once, 1,000, 1,000,000 versions of 1,000,000 people at 1,000,000 points on the space-time continuum. Yes. I don't understand that. My mind can't grasp that. Actually, you've done well. It's a very advanced concept, and you've done pretty well with it. You are also, right now, living lives in what in Earth time would be your future. It is the distance between your many selves that allows you to experience discrete identities and moments in time. Thus, the past that you remember and the future that you would see is the now that simply is. 1,000,000 versions of 1,000,000 people at 1,000,000 points in space-time. Everything everywhere all at once is starting to sound more like a description of how all of this works, isn't it? We do have one direct mention of the multiverse from God. The formula is simple. Time plus space equals appearance. If you could stand back far enough from the entire universe and the universe of universes, you would see the body of God. So what physicists are now conjecturing about is true? There is more than one universe? Yes, the cosmos is a multiverse, not a universe. So, to use a well-worn turn of phrase, we don't know the half of it. To be more accurate, and perhaps coin a new phrase, you don't know the 100th of it. If there's one through line to all of these materials, it's that time does not work the way we've been led to believe. Whereas we've thought of it as a straight line, it's actually a series of moments, and our lifetimes are moments picked out from an infinite number of realities. So how does this relate to the Mandela Effect? Well, some of these moments could come from Earths where the Fruit of the Loom logo had a cornucopia, or a movie where Sinbad starred as a genie released in the 90s. They compose our past even though they no longer exist in our present, and that's because we're currently experiencing a reality where they no longer happened. But that's really only part of it, and that's because the Mandela Effect isn't just a singular phenomenon. It's become a catch-all term for a multitude of phenomena that we don't fully grasp yet. Timeline shifts, memories of past lives, physical transformations in local reality, interdimensional bleeding. Each represents some aspect of the Mandela Effect, and we've become sensitive to all of it as our consciousness evolves. That's what this all seems to point to. The Mandela Effect is not only part of our spiritual journey, but our spiritual evolution. And as we evolve, we can expect that things are going to get a lot stranger because there's more to reality than meets the eye. Before I go, I strongly recommend that you go and read some of the channeled materials I've mentioned. I'm partial to conversations with God, but follow your own intuition. You might just find the answers you've been looking for. This has been the curator of the Mandela Effect database. Until next time, I'll see you around the multiverse.
Now, Neil Donald Walsh. His latest book is Friendship with God. There you see its cover. He's the author of Conversations with God, 3 different books. Those conversations on the New York Times bestseller list for more than 130 weeks. He kind of burst on the scene. Why you? Why did God talk to you and not to him and her?
Well, actually, God does talk to him and her, and to you and to all of us. The question isn't why me, but why have I chosen to listen? I think people choose to listen to the God who speaks to all of us when people get to a point in their lives when they are forced to or inspired to, one or the other.